webinar, part of our series, New Directions in Conservation Psychology. Today's webinar is called Creating a Conservation Movement, and we have presenter Brooke Tully with us to take us through a discussion and some background about Rogers' Diffusion of Innovations Theory and how it helps to explain or make sense of why some environmental movements seem to suddenly take off, whereas others seem to struggle with gaining widespread adoption. So in addition to exploring the theory of social norms that Brooke will cover in her presentation, she's also going to identify the behavioral underpinnings for why they occur and how these behavioral insights can be used to motivate greater adoption of conservation behaviors. So we'll begin with some introductions. I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Joy Ackerman, who teaches here at the Department of Environmental Studies with me at Antioch University, New England. Then Brooke Tully will give her presentation, and at the end we will have quite a bit of time for audience questions. So please be thinking as you go through the presentation with Brooke about what you want to be asking about through the Q&A box. First, a little bit of background. So Brooke Tully, who just recently got married, so many of you on this broadcast may know her as Brooke Sadowski, spent the first part of her career working with ad agencies, including Ogilvy, focusing with clients on how to reach target audiences to build brand awareness, to change preferences, and quite honestly, to sell products. So a different set of outcomes than many of us who are focused on conservation may be thinking about, but some of the techniques for that type of approach certainly apply in the conservation space. In 2007, she joined the NGO RARE, where she designed and implemented behavior change campaigns that inspired communities in Mongolia, Thailand, Laos, and the Philippines to adopt more sustainable fishing and hunting behaviors. And operating as an independent consultant since that time, since 2016, Brooke now supports nonprofits with designing marketing plans for social change. She also produces a bi-monthly newsletter on marketing and behavior insights for Brooke 2 Cents subscribers. And we came to know Brooke as a participant in our Conservation Psychology Institute. She joined us, we think, and she thanks for the 2014 CPI that we held here at Antioch University, New England. So we were thrilled that she wanted to come back and offer this presentation today. You'll see a little bit of background here on the screen about me. I serve as co-director here at Antioch of the Center for Climate Preparedness and Community Resilience, and also now of the Conservation Psychology Initiative. I also direct the Advocacy for Social Justice and Sustainability Master's Degree concentration here. And during my time at Antioch, I've actually been involved in a number of initiatives to advance sustainability and social justice aspects of how this campus community functions. But my public engagement, my research, and my teaching focus on change leadership, facilitating pro-environmental behavior, and translating values into effective action. My colleague, Dr. Joy Ackerman, is core faculty here in the department, where she serves as the co-director with me of the Conservation Psychology Initiative. And Joy teaches graduate courses, including our Master's Conservation Psychology course at the doctoral level, Ecological Thought and Making Sense of Place. Joy also does advise students in the Conservation Psychology Certificate Program, as well as the self-designed MS in Environmental Studies, and works with our doctoral students with interests in spirituality, place, and nature experience. Quick word on logistics. Everyone should be connected when you enter into the webinar via the audio broadcast. You do not need to call in, and you are automatically muted by our coordinator, Terry Downing. The presentation will be recorded and it will be posted to the Antioch website within 1 week. So if you'd like to go back and watch this session again, you'll have access to it there on the site. I'd ask that you submit any questions you have for our presenter, Brooke Tully, in the Q&A section. And if you're actually having trouble with any aspect of the broadcast from a technical perspective, please use the chat section to message the host directly. Finally, at the end of this broadcast, we will be sending out a brief survey, and we would ask that you take a few minutes to offer feedback through that survey instrument. It really helps us in thinking about what topics are of most relevance to you all as the audience for this webinar series, and helps us to be more effective in developing future sessions. So thanks in advance for taking time to do that. Now, I'm pleased to turn over the broadcast to Brooke Tully, Creating a Conservation Movement. Welcome, Brooke.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go do the share screen and try to take over control. See if we can do that. Okay, that looks like it worked. Oops, I'm going to go back one. Well, hi everyone. It is great to be here with you, or here virtually, as here literally is in the comfort of my own home and still very chilly upstate New York. I appreciate everyone spending this hour with us. I'm going to go through just about a half hour of presentation, and we have time for questions, which is exciting. If you're eating lunch now, I hope you have something yummy in front of you, and if you're eating dinner, I hope it is equally yummy as your lunch. So today we'll be talking about creating a conservation movement. Abby did a wonderful job with an intro to me, so I don't need to spend time on this slide, and that saves us about 5-10 minutes of the presentation. Just kidding. So what we will cover today, since I don't have to talk about me, is defining social norms, how movements happen and when they become norms, why some movements seem to take off and others don't, and that was in like the intro blurb for the webinar, and how you can create a movement for your own conservation initiative. So starting with, what are social norms? This term seems to get thrown around, and I want to dig into what these really are and how they appear around us. The Oxford Reference Dictionary actually defines social norms as common standards within a social group regarding socially acceptable or appropriate behavior in particular social situations, the breach of which has social consequences. So clearly social is used numerous times in that definition. The strength of these norms vary from loose expectations to unwritten rules. Some of the things I really would want to point out here is that these aren't necessarily written or formal rules. They can be kind of loose, certainly typically unwritten. And they define what's considered acceptable or appropriate behavior in a particular social situation. So the situation that one is in counts. But there are social consequences for not adhering or complying with these acceptable or appropriate behaviors. And I love to look at some of the kind of more common social norms that we would find around us on a daily basis. One of my favorites is standing in an elevator. And it's one of my favorites to just kind of observe these natural norms and behaviors that happen around us, which certainly have never been written anywhere. As long as I can tell, I don't think they've ever been written anywhere. But we all seem to kind of like naturally, instinctively comply with these rules and these norms. And then certainly if you come into an elevator and you're very loud, if you stand in the opposite direction, even being on your phone, you might get some looks from people, which would be, in essence, the social consequences. Another example is walking down the side of the street. This is something we probably don't think about on a regular basis, but in the US, we have, we walk one way on the right side and the other way on the left side. I like to use this example because it highlights that these norms can be different depending on where you go. So when the definition talked about, certain situations, one norm here would be a different norm in another country. And certainly if you travel to other parts of the world and have instinctively gone up the stairs in one direction in, like, let's say a public transportation area, you quickly learn and observe that you might be going the wrong way. Again, typically those aren't written, although I do see more and more places saying, stand to the right. One that's a little bit more related to some of the work that we do in conservation would be scooping the poop. This is something that's actually been in existence. There's been some local laws for the last 40 or 50 years, but it's a norm still in progress. I know when I was a kid walking my dogs, honestly, like scooping the poop was not something we were ever told to do. It's not even something I knew was a thing. But nowadays you see more and more people who have dogs have these little like plastic poop baggies with them. Um, and you can think of a variety of other things in our daily lives that, you know, we may not be all that conscious or aware of, but have actually become social norms. Things like washing your hands after you're using your restroom, you know, should be a law. It is for some people, but it's basically a norm. Coughing in our sleeves and so on. There's a lot of other examples like that. You know, in conservation and behavior change, a lot of times social norms are what we would consider to be the ultimate end goal. We really want to get to a place where the behaviors and the actions we're proposing become so much ingrained in our daily lives that, you know, we don't even have to have conscious decision making around it. And I really want to look at how movements happen in the first place, and then at what point do they become norms? All of these things started at one point or another. They didn't become norms overnight. And this is where we're going to dive into the diffusion of innovation theory. This was developed, I believe, in the 60s, maybe early 70s. And it describes, it is a theory that describes how, why, and at what rate new ideas and technology spread through a given community. And I'll say more a little bit later about a given community. And what we look at, and at the bottom of the screen, you see there's a box called innovators. This is what's considered 2.5% of the population, a given population. And these are the first group, the first people that will adopt an idea, a piece of technology, or a behavior before anyone else. It's a small number, 2.5% is a very small number, but these are the people willing to take a high risk and just basically go for it. And in an example of technology, you know, these would be the first ones in line for the brand new phone, even if nobody else they know has it, and there hasn't been any public reviews about it. You know, they're high risk takers. They're willing to just go ahead and try it, not even knowing if it's something that's going to stick around for a long time. After the innovators, you get a slightly larger group of people at 13.5% called the early adopters. They are not quite as big of risk takers, although they're, you know, they're in the forefront. They're a little bit more selective, and they require a bit more social proof before adopting a norm or an idea or technology. Again, an example of technology, let's say, you know, when smartphones came out, they may need one of their friends to have it, but they don't need a majority of their friends to have it before they jump on board. So this is about 16% of the population, still a relatively small number, but you'll see from there, it really jumps up. So once you have innovators and early adopters on board, suddenly you get this 34% leap of early majority. This is the group, they do wait longer to see if this is a norm that's gonna stick. They don't really wanna invest in something that may just be a fad or a trend. You know, in some cases they want to see that it's going to work out any bugs or, you know, issues in the system before they invest their time or their energy or their money. And they're more likely to hold out and wait to see what opinion leaders are saying before they do this. Opinion leaders could be friends of theirs and people in their peer group, or more formal reviews, like a consumers reports kind of thing before they do anything. But now at this point, we have 50% of the group that's adopted a norm. And really, this is what we would consider to be the tipping point, which is a popular term thanks to Malcolm Gladwell that wrote a book about it. And it really does show that, you know, once you've hit about 50% of people doing a thing or having a thing, then it really, you know, the rate of adoption really speeds up from there. And that is shown by the next group that gets on board is another whopping 34% of people. That is considered the late majority. They are holding out, and it is going to take them longer to get on board. But once they're on board, you know, this rate of adoption has really jumped up. One of the keys with the late majority is that, you know, prior to this point, they still feel like it's kind of risky to conform or adopt. At this point, when there's already 50% of the people or the population adopting, it actually becomes too risky for them not to adopt. And I think that's really one of the keys of the tipping point, is that what seems before to be you're kind of the odd man if you're in it. After this point, you're the odd man if you're not in it. And that really shifts a lot of the social dynamics. Lastly, you have laggards. This is actually still like 16% of the population. And I put here that they're the curmudgeons who are never going to adopt. And in some cases, that's true. Technology, sometimes it's someone who is of a certain age that says, it's just not going to be worth my time. And that's something my grandmother would say a lot in terms of computers. In some cases, what I write here is not fair because, let's say, again, in the case of technology, there are some parts of the world where people just don't have access to it. So either for infrastructure, other system purposes, even if they have the intention and the desire to adopt, the accessibility isn't there to allow them to adopt. So you may still have laggards. But once you have the late majority on board, it's basically 84% of a group that has adopted the norm. And this is really when we can consider that it is a social norm. And that's the point where a movement has made it up here is the S curve. And we can say that it is a social norm at this point. This follows like a standard deviation curve. It also could be presented in a bell curve. I prefer showing it in the S curve because it really highlights this sort of steep rate of adoption once you get early majority and late majority on board. I will point out that this line on the bottom that says time is not specific, and that's because this rate of adoption will vary in terms of how long it takes depending on the scope. So what's the size of this community population we're talking about? Is it a group of friends? Is it an office place? Is it an entire district, state, country, world? So as that scope expands, the timeline is likely to also expand. So for example, when you go to a sports game and somebody starts the wave, or at the end of the play, someone starts a standing ovation, that actually still follows this S curve, but it happens within minutes. In other cases, it takes a lot longer time to see the rate of adoption go up. One of the reasons why I tend to be a big fan of diffusion of innovation theory is that for me, it factors in that we're not just on our own. We're not making decisions purely by ourselves or just in our own heads. We're really heavily influenced by the social context around us. So these are the people who are our inner circle, parents who raised us, our own family unit, our group of friends, even our colleagues at work, as well as the strangers we encounter, people at the grocery store, people who ride public transportation with us, people on the street that we pass going to and from different places. We don't necessarily think as strangers as people who influence our behaviors and actions, but they very much do, because if a majority of people are indicating a certain norm, a certain socially appropriate behavior, we are likely to comply even without very much rationalization or conscious decision making. And that happens kind of automatically. Sorry, I'm going to take a sip of water for a second. Okay, moving on. So in the webinar blurb intro, I said, some movements seem to take off and others don't. And why is that? Now, some that haven't taken off, maybe they just haven't taken off yet. Maybe that timeline's a little bit longer for them. But let's take a look at why some may be taking off and why some haven't. And I do want to look at the ones that I specifically called out in the blurb. The first one being buying organic, and specifically buying organic produce, not all products. So this is still very much a norm in progress. It hasn't totally become, fully ingrained in everyone, although, latest statistics do show that 84% of households have some organic produce in their house, which is great. But it does show, even though this is still growing, between 2015 and 2016, organic food sales grew 8.4%. Now, that's not a huge leap, but it's really big considering that the overall food market was basically flat during that time, so it had very little to no growth. This is a segment that in the last 10 years has more than doubled and now consists of more than 5% of total food sales. And these are numbers that the organic produce movement has not yet seen, so they are achieving new heights on a regular basis. And if you look at food sales over the last 10 years, you can see that it reflects a little bit of like the bottom of this S-curve, sort of middle to the S-curve, right? It has a little bit of flat, but it is steadily growing up and has the potential and is on the pathway to going all the way up this S-curve. Some of the reasons why this is a movement and why this is growing faster in the last few years than it has before then is, millennials are driving growth. This is a population with strong values and high purchasing power that they align with those values. The links to health benefits have really prompted people to buy organic. And I will note that health benefits have been a larger driver than the environmental benefits. So that's something for us to think about when we are promoting conservation-related behaviors, is thinking about what's really going to drive people to make these choices, what's the personal benefits for them. And these last three, so the number of options increasing, it's more readily available, there's greater visibility, a lot of those are infrastructure changes. And those are changes that have largely been prompted by the demand for organic produce. And once they're in place, they actually also help drive higher demand for organic produce. So these are some of the ingredients that just show what's contributing to the growth of organic in the past few years. Some of the things that are still kind of in the works or under construction is cost is still a factor. It's still more expensive to buy organic produce. There's an issue of limited agriculture, although it accounts for 5% of food sales. It's only about 1% of agriculture farmland are considered organic. So that will need to shift in order to be able to meet the demand. And certainly there's some skepticism and conflicting reports. So is organic really good for us? Is it really good for the environment? What about the carbon outputs it takes from stuff going from California to New York, for example? And these are things that would really need to be addressed or solved in order for organic produce to become a true norm, to really get all the way up that S-curve. And these are things that could really potentially prevent it from going there as well if these things are not addressed. So the other one I called out is reusable shopping bags. And this is the one I called out as struggling, not yet taking off. Reusable bags were introduced in the late 70s. And let's see what the numbers are saying about this. Consumers say they forget their reusable bags during 40% of grocery trips. That's like almost half of their grocery trips. They're forgetting to bring their reusable bags. 60% have reported using plastic bags during their last grocery trip. And some of this is because they forgot their bags entirely. Some of this is actually because they didn't bring enough reusable bags. So they're actually supplementing their reusable bags with plastic bags because they didn't have enough for the amount of groceries that they bought. But 60%, when we look at tipping point being about 50%, 84% being a social norm, I mean, 60% means that using plastic is still more of a norm than not using plastic when you go grocery shopping. And that's a little bit concerning, especially considering it's been around for a while. A bright spot here, though, is that 61% of consumers say they prefer using reusable bags. So the desire, the preference, and let's say the attitude is there, but the action is not yet matching that. And I do want to point out this highlights actually a cognitive psychology issue that happens a lot with behavior change, is what we call the intention-action gap. People may want to adopt a certain behavior, may want to do things differently, but actually doing it does not necessarily 100% correlate with the desire to want to do it. And anyone, if you're like me, who wants to lose weight but doesn't go to the gym that often, you're experiencing the intention-action gap. So I want to look at what's going on with reusable bags and why it is, struggling to be adopted. The things working for it, certainly it's an easy behavior to adopt. We're not asking a lot of people. They're already going shopping, they're already using bags. It's relatively low cost and free. You know, you can get like a reusable bag basically at any conference you go to, and most people have plenty of them actually. And the environmental benefits are already really well known, and that's been promoted pretty heavily over the last few years. The challenge is that it's difficult to remember. So even though the behavior of shopping is changing, the behaviors of keeping reusable bags in your car or in your purse, remembering to bring them out, remembering to have enough, all of those things are becoming barriers and make it difficult to actually comply with the behavior. Although the environmental benefits are known, the personal benefits are a little bit unclear. Like, what am I getting out of, you know, using a reusable bag? And that can actually contribute to making it difficult to remember. Because if it really is something that's important to me, personally, I'm more likely to remember to do it. It comes aligned with more of my choice and value set. Similar to that, with the personal benefit, it can get messy and convenient. There is still skepticism and conflicting reports. Is it really better than plastic? And it's hard to know how many you need, which means that still quite often we're seeing people supplementing with plastic. And again, those are some of the challenges that can actually prevent reusable bags from kind of becoming a movement. And there's also the potential for disruptive innovations, just kind of breaking that movement altogether, such as more quickly biodegradable plastic bags getting introduced and maybe shifting the behavior altogether. So we've looked at an example of something that seems to be taking off, something that seems to be struggling, but all along there are kind of really some common themes among movements that do just seem to take off. And I want to walk through what those are. I want to walk through those ingredients to see what it may take to start our own movements for the conservation issues that we are all individually or collectively focused on. Throughout this next section where I'm talking about these ingredients, I'm going to use the bike share program as an example, specifically City Bike in New York. They have done a great job of taking a very long-standing and a very difficult challenge of getting people to bike more to work or when they're going out instead of using cars or public transportation into a movement. I mean, I know for years, behavior change specialists have been kind of hitting their heads against walls about how do we get people to use their bikes more and rely less on vehicles that are, you know, contributing to pollution. And bike sharing program like City Bike has just really come in and disrupted a lot of that and has created a movement. And I want to look a little bit more into how they were able to do that. But to prove that, you know, I'm not full of it and that City Bike and bike sharing programs really have taken off, I have some graphs to prove my point here. You know, they didn't start till 2010, and you can see here, 2010 to 2012, it's kind of, you know, low. It's kind of slow. It totally looks like that's basically innovators and early adopters. And come 2013, you just have a jump. You have a jump both in number of bikes, you know, available, but also in ridership. What's interesting to me is that 2013 and 2014, the number of bikes being introduced was kind of relatively stable, but ridership is still increasing at a high rate. So you can see how this graph, especially the blue line on ridership, is very much reflecting this diffusion of innovation S-curve. And, you know, super excited when I saw this graph, actually. And actually, just between 2015 and 2016, there was a 25% increase in ridership. I mean, that is just huge. And you really see how this is just kind of taking off in leaps and bounds. And it's a great example of how quickly something could diffuse and get adopted over time. So with both City Bike and many other social movements I've seen happen, both in the conservation space and otherwise, I've seen that all these movements require really 5 things to help it grow. This is communicating the norm, and I'm going to walk through all of these. Leveraging influencers and early adopters, increasing real and perceived self-efficacy, showing the desired behavior, making it popular and safe. And again, I'm going to use City Bike really as an example for how they've done all of this. The first one is communicate the norm. So describe the actions or behaviors others are doing when in a similar situation. And this is really called like descriptive norms. And this is really important because when people are entering a new situation, they don't always know what the appropriate or socially acceptable behavior is. So sometimes they need to know what others are doing. Or when people are in situations that they're used to, but the behaviors we're asking of them is changing, they also need to have a bit of a cue as to what other people are doing. And we've seen this in the past, I don't know how many years, 20 years, let's say, or less, in hotel rooms. Well, we'll get a little notice that say most people are reusing their towels during their stay. That's a behavior that we are, a situation that we're used to. We're used to staying in hotel rooms, but the behavior has shifted where it's gone from, hey, just throw your towels anywhere, we'll replace them all the time, and that's the luxury of staying in hotel rooms, to a behavior that's now more conscious about reusing our towels. Now, descriptive norms really is like this idea of telling people what others are doing. It doesn't always have to be done quite that literally. You can do it a bit more creatively. Here is an Instagram post from City Bike saying, we just reached over 50,000 rides. And that is really an indicator to say, this is how many people are doing this. And if I'm not yet doing City Bike, which honestly I'm not, it gives me a sense of, wow, a lot of people are doing that. Maybe that is the thing people are doing, and I should start considering it. And also the fact that City Bike all look exactly the same. When you're out in the street in New York and you just see these blue bikes all over the place, that too is an indication of what the norm is, without anyone really having to describe it. And the reason why descriptive norms are important is that knowing what others are doing really drives compliance and change. In addition, it instills in the belief that that change is possible to do, because so many other people have already done it. Now, new research is out on dynamic norms, and dynamic norms really dynamic norms describes not what people are already doing, but what they're trying to do. And they found that that can be even more powerful. So just learning that other people are changing can instigate all these psychological processes that motivate further change. It begins to think if that change is possible, that change is important, and that in the future, the norms will be different. So it starts to say, oh, things are changing. I should get on board now so I'm not left behind. And the example in this study, which is pretty interesting, is I think it's from this study. People go into a restaurant and they say many people are trying to eat less meat and are ordering more vegetarian meals. So it's not saying X% are already doing this, but just indicating more people are aiming to make this change. And they found that that actually motivated more people to buy plant-based meals at that particular restaurant. Really fascinating stuff, something to think about. Another ingredient is leverage innovators and early adopters. So certainly one of the great reasons why these are the first ones that are on the bandwagon, the first ones adopting. And the way to leverage them is really to give them a platform or an incentive to share their experience with others. And I don't really mean like a financial incentive, but an uplifting incentive. If these are the first people that are trying something new or doing a new behavior technology, the peer-to-peer communication of them telling others what it's like, why they want to do it, is really, really powerful. More so than you always having to tell that message to them. In this example, this is Leonardo DiCaprio with Jonah Hill riding City Bike. City Bike was not very well received when it first came out. Leo was there. Leo, we're on like a first name basis. He was there filming something, started using City Bike, and it went viral all over the internet, and everyone was like, oh, people are using this. And actually, with Leonardo DiCaprio using it, it actually inspired other celebrities to use City Bike, which in turn inspired even more people, regular people like us, to use it. And that really was very powerful and really causing that first leap for City Bike's adoption curve, as well as having some coverage in New Yorker, which is a very influential magazine in New York, showing that there's a new way of riding your bike. You don't have to do it inside behind a wall. You can actually do it outside. Increasing real and perceived self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is one's belief in their ability and skills to do an action or a behavior. Changing behavior is hard, and I feel like we often carry a lot of self-doubt about whether or not we can do it. And this is with anyone. It's sort of natural for us to feel that way. And if that's the case, if this is a new behavior or something different, we really should help the audience believe that they can do it. And we also should make it as easy as possible for them to do it. On the left side, the top and the bottom, those are from the City Bike website. And it gives you an opportunity to understand the process, to understand the bike before you even get on it. So it helps you build that sense of confidence of, I know what I'm getting into, and I know I can do it. The kiosks, once you get to City Bike, are very explanatory. They actually had to redesign this because the initial version was sort of complicated. And I think we've found this in a lot of our work. You know, direction can be really complex. So how do we make it as simple and as intuitive to encourage the behavior even more? You know, and the bottom line is nobody wants to look stupid when they're trying to do something new. So let's help them do it as safely and as constructively as possible. Next one is show the behavior. You know, certainly social media and digital is a great way of doing this, but too often we show the problem. And really what we should be doing is showing the desired behavior, showing what it looks like, show other people doing it, make it real, make it seem possible, and in as many places as possible. So again, using digital, showing real people doing the behavior and sharing that is a great way of doing it. The image on the left-hand side is actually the Jersey City mayor leading a group of his colleagues on a bike tour saying, you know, you can do this during the day, you can do this to get to work. But things like organizing behavior demonstrations is a great way of making people feel a bit more comfortable with the desired behavior change. And lastly, and this is somewhat similar to efficacy, make the behavior popular and socially safe to do. And ways of doing that is celebrate those who are already doing it, you know, similar to leveraging the influencers and early adopters. And this is something on the left side of these like member profiles. I recommend this to clients all the time. You know, this allows me to connect with others that are similar to me, understand why they decided to join City Bike, how they use it. So I just get to feel like there's other people like me out there who are doing it and making this choice. The selection of popular rides is really great. It means I don't have to figure it out myself. Somebody's already done it for me. People are already taking these routes. And then it's really like an easier access and accessibility for me to get on a bike, try something without feeling like it's daunting or overwhelming or scary. Other people have already done it. People are doing it now. So it feels both popular and socially safe. So to summarize everything I've gone through, I believe that you can absolutely create conservation movements for your own causes. I've seen it happen. I've seen them work. We've all actually seen them work. And some of the ingredients it takes to make these causes just kind of, you know, jump off like other ones we've seen is communicate the norm, leverage the influencers and early adopters, show the behavior, make it popular and safe, and increase everyone's self-efficacy. Typically, that's my believed and perceived self-efficacy. In some cases, you may actually have to offer and provide trainings in case those individuals don't actually have the skills and capability to adopt the new behavior. Thank you. I do have two plugs here. One is I put together a set of resources available for you that are on this topic. If you want to dig in further, you can find that at brooks2cents.com/conpsych/ I think you need that second slash. Also, I'm on the board of the Social Marketing Association of North America. This is a network for social change marketers. We have networking events all across the country. We also do an Ask the Expert series. We have newsletters that promote different happenings, different conferences for social change marketing. And I really encourage you checking that out and becoming a member with us. Thank you. I think we're at questions.
All right, can anybody hear me? I'm not seeing you, but.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, this is Joy Ackerman. Brooke, thank you. That was just fantastic. My role will be to look in the Q&A section where people are already posting their questions, and then let you answer them if you can, or you know, Abby, you can feel free to jump in too. So let's start with a couple of questions from Kelly. The first one was, she wants to know if you have advice on how to identify or find early adopters and how to convince them to be public with their activity.
That's great. I'm just writing that down because there's two parts. Convincing. Okay. Certainly, the scope and scale of the project will impact your ability to do that. But I guess so. My head is in two different places again, depending on the scale. If it is something where there is social media involved, I think certainly tracking social mentions on the behavior of people doing it. If it is a smaller scale project, ideally there's familiarity enough with the community to be able to see anyone who is doing different behavior or doing the desired behavior. It could, probably the most intensive way of doing this would be kind of a round of qualitative research and doing interviews to identify if anyone knows of anyone who is adopting the desired behavior already. And sometimes that could be, an intro to a project. I mean, a lot of times when we're introducing new behaviors, there may already be folks out there who are doing it. It's just really that a very small number of people. There's some great research out there actually on positive deviance theory, and that's usually identifying individuals that have, basically developed their own solutions to a long-standing problem, and usually it's quite a selection of qualitative research to discover those individuals. In terms of convincing them to speak publicly about it, that will definitely vary on like the level of the type of behavior you're talking about. There are, certainly cases where people will be more than happy to, and really be seen as like an ambassador and a messenger to others. There are some cases, honestly, though, where innovators and early adopters may be perceived as just being like, quote unquote, different in their community and may not even be the best messengers. So I do just want to caveat that it's going to be context specific in terms of who is best to leverage and when is best to leverage. In most situations, though, you'll find that those innovators and early adopters, whether they're young or old, have great relationships within those communities and can really start to spread it through their peer group, even if you don't want to make them super public. But at least reaching out to them and asking them to, maybe hand out pamphlets or flyers, help co-facilitate a discussion group, and things like that can go a really long ways.
Great, thank you. And Kelly had a quick question about the City Bike graphic, the process they used to redesign that. How did they know that the design was not so good? And where do you go from there when it's not working?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It actually was a set of students at the School for Visual Arts where Citibank came in. I think they asked the students to do a project. I don't remember if the issue was the kiosk or if they just said, here's a full canvas of city bikes. What would you do differently? But they did find actually through observational research that those people who were not members of City Bike. So if you're a member, you kind of have like a key fob and you can check out a bike anytime. Those people who were using the kiosk and were not members were often walking away doing nothing. And these two students at the School of Visual Arts who ended up getting hired for a summer to actually test this, and they tested it several times with audience members and iterated it until it was kind of well understood by a number of people, and then went through the process of redesigning the kiosk. Certainly there's money behind that. But identifying where some of the problems are, what's making people walk away, and having some great creative minds helping think through, where's the point where people are falling off, and how can we improve that experience and make it as intuitive as possible. And I think this is, in the example of reusable bags, there's something to be said about needing that kind of creative eye there. How do we make this even simpler to do so that it's just an intuitive process and doesn't require as much, conscious planning and preparation.
All right, great. So here's kind of turning the whole situation on its head a little bit. Rachel's asking, what about cases where we want people to not do something instead of adopting a behavior?
Yes, and this actually comes up a lot in conservation, actually. Um, and this is, I'm going to play a little bit of the devil's advocate role in this, is that, I've been working on projects where, we want fishers to stop fishing illegally. And we need you to stop doing this. Really where I come from, and I'm just going to say this is from my opinion and my experience, is that for me, it's all about diverting that behavior. So we can't go in with a stop message. We need to go in with doing something differently. So it's a change in behavior or an adoption of a new behavior, and not just a stop. If we're asking somebody to stop something, we're almost always asking them to do something else instead. And there's ways of promoting that something else instead to make it sound like a better option, and not just sound like a better option, but really be a better option for everyone involved. And I would say some of that comes with really like further exploration on what some of the behaviors are that are causing the problem, and where there's an opportunity to shift it so that the undesirable behaviors aren't happening.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I don't know if this is related to it or not, but one of our viewers is getting back to the question of social norms and consequences, and asking, well, what about the role of shaming? As in, what kind of a jerk brings a disposable water bottle to yoga class? Does this have a role in promoting new social norms?
I would say absolutely. I'd also say let's all be really careful with that. I have found in new social norms that that shaming, so this is really like the social consequences of not conforming to the norm, tends to happen on like a peer-to-peer basis. And that's when it's honestly most powerful. So not necessarily like campaigns or messages shaming people, but having those adopters be the ones that start to enforce and reinforce the norms themselves. And to be honest, that can be a very awkward and uncomfortable process. I've been thinking a lot lately. I'm on a train line that goes from where I live down to New York City. And recently they've established some cars to be quiet cars. You're not supposed to be on your phone. You're not supposed to be having loud conversations. And that's totally new. Like Amtrak has it, but this train line doesn't. And a lot of people don't even realize that they're in this quiet car. The signage isn't great. Conductors barely say anything. But other people in the train car will start to reinforce the norm or enforce the norm for people who are really loud on the phone. It is incredibly uncomfortable and awkward. And I'm even knowing all of these dynamics, I'm not even all that comfortable myself being that person. And honestly, I'm typically not that person. But it does happen, and it does play a really important role. It is just mostly powerful when it's coming from other people in that same social construct in that particular situation, and not from an outsider or an authority figure. Although, a branch of this conversation can take us somewhere else about the role of enforcement versus self-compliance, which there's information on my site on that if you're interested. But
Yeah,
it is a tangent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I guess I have to say from my own experience that sometimes when I feel shamed, I almost kind of dig into the behavior that I'm being shamed for and try to justify it. And I might come around, but going back to your slide showing people on the elevators, we learn that that's what to do by watching other people doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And same with walking on the side of the street. It's not as if I couldn't see the behavior of others, that I would know what they were doing. If I went into that social situation with blinders on, how would I know to adopt that? So I think sometimes we forget to say that we have evolved to really cue in to what other people do, and just by coming to yoga and hoping that everybody else is not bringing a disposable water bottle, that behavior might might soak in through that normative messaging.
Yeah, and that's definitely true for newer situations. If you've ever walked into a new kind of casual fast food restaurant and you're not really sure how the ordering and taking happens, a lot of people will just take a minute and see, what are others doing in this situation, and then I'll follow course.
Mm.
It can be a little bit trickier in situations that you're used to, so you do have those blinders on, but the norms and the rules have changed kind of unbeknownst to you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So one of our participants is asking, really, I guess it's a question of scale. And you did mention this briefly in talking about a movement, but if someone's trying to initiate a movement, is it better to start with maybe a local neighborhood scale? Or does it really depend on your role and your organizational mission?
That's a great question. I think it would depend a lot on the behavior and movement you're trying to start. Um, I think all of these movements are going to start smaller before they get bigger. If you are not sure about if this is something that's going to be readily adopted or if there's going to be resistance to it, then I would suggest starting small with what maybe it's a neighborhood or a community, and then seeing if it's something that can get expanded even wider. Even smaller initiatives, like there's been a whole movement on electric bill to show how much your electricity you're spending compared to your neighbors. And that's a great example also of kind of descriptive norms, or making it more visible and popular to reduce your energy use. Those efforts that have really shown to produce results in terms of reducing energy use, those started with, I don't know, energy bills go to what, like a neighborhood. They started on like a neighborhood basis before they started kind of repeating it in more and more neighborhoods. And now it's going to get rolled out more and more across states in the country. So depending on the resources you have available, which I think most of us probably work for nonprofits or academic institutions, which means limited resources, I would start small, see how receptive it is, see how things are working, and then take it from there.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. The person who asked the question was considering starting a movement to avoid plastic straws in the neighborhood. And I don't know if this is a thing in marketing, but we banned the disposable bottle on our campus as a result of students engaging in a movement that really connected students from one campus to another. So there's like a network of different nodes where the behavior started and changed many institutions. So I don't know if there's a name for that kind of a strategy, or whether the person who wants to start it in their neighborhood might be encouraged to link with other people in other neighborhoods to get some encouragement.
Yeah, and I've actually been talking about the plastic straw thing a bit recently, and that could be a movement when you actually start less with the individuals and more with places of business in a neighborhood. So start with the coffee shops or other local restaurants that are maybe not chains, but are more kind of locally owned. Because that's also a diffusion. So not just individuals adopting, but you can also use the diffusion curve to think about businesses adopting and that change happening through that way. I mean, like the smoking ban, really took off along those lines, more from business to business, more than individual to individual.
Yeah, and I felt a lot safer as a customer in a restaurant having the restaurant enforce that rather than me asking people to move if they were smoking.
Exactly.
So related to that, someone asked if you're starting a movement on a university campus, is that easier for any reason? And who would be the influencers in a campus setting?
That's interesting. So I'm going to give probably my best take on that, although I don't work on campuses really very much at all. So I feel like a college campus, especially with the student body generation as it is now, I find that this generation that's in school and graduating school have really strong values and really strong principles and are really willing to fight and stand for things. So I feel like right now that's like the hotbed of activism and movement. So I would totally, think that starting there would be great. And I think so. Again, it depends on the behavior and the situation. Maybe there are already some clubs or organizations or student groups that are kind of well aligned with that and would be interested in pursuing and spearheading an initiative like that. And then those students themselves would likely probably be the influencers and the early adopters. And a lot of that really comes in having some discussions in terms of, and maybe some observational research. Who seems to be the ones kind of leading the trends on that campus? It's likely not authority figures, could be, likely not. But who are the ones within the student body that seem to be the trendsetters, that seem to be the ones at most events that people are listening to, whether it's on social media or campus boards, whether they're digital or real, or just on campus, what you can see. And I think you look to those to be the ones that you can even bring into the fold earlier to help the adoption spread.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. It's a very layered organization, and sometimes there's a lot of separation between, say, staff and faculty and students, or even students in one department and another. So we're getting near the end of time. We have about 5 more minutes left. I just want to see if Abby wants to jump in with focusing our attention toward any particular questions. Brooke, you can go to the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen if you want to scan through the questions that are there.
Oh, wow. Lots of questions.
There's lots. Yeah, sometimes we'll follow up in the email. I know somebody wanted the links that were in your slides, and we'll provide those in a follow-up email. So there are 2 here that I think are kind of interesting. One is movements that have started with youth, and one is using this framework with effortful behavior like physical activity. So maybe you could take your pick of those.
Can you repeat the physical one?
Yeah, the physical one says, how do you see this framework applying to an effortful and broad behavior like physical activity? So maybe let's get people to exercise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and this is, so, now we're kind of in the health field, and they've done a lot of work on this. Something around exercise, which I think we tend to think about as purely personal decisions, are not always all that personal. So there's still a whole social context around it. And I would actually just point to Weight Watchers as a great example of this. Again, it's a corporate entity, but they created an app for Weight Watchers members called Connect, and it is this great way of people in a really, really safe, positive format sharing their goals and their achievements and their movements, and it's all just like social encouragement, even from people they don't know. And we are really, really influenced by the people around us. If we're with a partner or a spouse or with friends that don't exercise as much, we're less likely to exercise. If we're with those that do exercise more, we feel more pressure to exercise. And I could definitely just keep like rambling on about that. One thing I would just add, that in terms of messaging to promote those behaviors, one of the areas where we tend to fail at is that we make those messages too broad, too ambiguous, and it really needs to get more specific and not too many options. That's another area we fall victim to is, exercise more regularly. You can do this, 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 and this, which overwhelms people and they don't really end up doing anything. So getting as specific as possible, take a walk for 30 minutes can help move people in that direction. It seems accessible, it seems easy, and if we give all the tools that make it popular, safe, and tap into self-efficacy, people are more likely to do that.
Great, thank you. We'll do our best to get back to these questions with Brooke and maybe send out some additional points to everybody. Abby, do you have any last comments, or Brooke?
I just want to thank you, Brooke, for your presentation today, and also to the participants who sent in those questions. This has been a really great discussion.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'm totally more than happy to write up answers and responses to all the questions that were submitted that we didn't get to, and even the ones that we did.
Okay, great. Yeah, some of them are kind of detailed, like the font for your slides, which may not be of general interest. So Terry will make sure that you have all those. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. It's been great to have you on board. Brooke, it's just been great to hear you share your work with us. And I hope that some of my students are watching too. So all right, thank you, everybody. I'll leave it to Terry to close our presentation.
Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Just wanted to remind you, you'll get a link to a survey right after the webinar is done, and we hope you'll give us some good feedback that we can use for planning future programs.